Disclaimer. This video contains spoilers for these Destiny 1 titles. There are time codes in the description if you want to jump around. Are we ready to go? Fantastic. Now, eyes up, Guardian. The year is 2007, and video game developer Bungie is on top of the world. Over the last 6 years, they have dominated the gaming space with the record-breaking and critically acclaimed Halo trilogy. Launching with the original Xbox in 2001, the first Halo game revolutionized first-person shooters on console, while also featuring a groundbreaking story that only continued in its scope for the sequels Halo 2 and Halo 3. It was an epic, spacefaring saga centering around the UNSC's struggles against the Covenant, with Master Chief, the green-armored super soldier, right in the middle of the action from top to bottom. This was a significant chapter in Bungie's history, a major turning point. After spending years developing ambitious titles for the Mac, they managed to finally break into the mainstream space with record-breaking sales numbers and genuine impact on how the gaming industry moved forward. But of course, it wasn't gonna last forever. Back in 2000, Microsoft acquired Bungie, a move that saved the studio from potential bankruptcy and helped create the Halo trilogy. But Bungie did not want to become a Halo machine. They didn't want to be a studio that only ever made Halo games until the heat death of the universe. They had other creative muscles that they were itching to stretch. Which is why, shortly after Halo 3's release in 2007, it was announced that Bungie and Microsoft would be parting ways. Bungie was going to become independent. This was huge news across the gaming industry, as this powerhouse developer was now going to be free of its shackles to do even cooler and crazier things going forward. Now, there was a compromise. Microsoft stipulated that they had to make 2 more Halo games after Halo 3, and they would ultimately have to leave Halo behind. This franchise that they had built from the ground up would have to be let go and transferred to another team to pick it up from where they leave off. It was on one hand incredibly bittersweet and somewhat sad to say goodbye to this franchise that they had brought along since its inception, but while one door closes, another opens. And that door provided an opportunity that was incredibly exciting. They were now going to create a whole new world. In 2007, development began internally for Bungie's next game changer. Initially, things began with Jason Jones, the company's CEO, and Jamie Griesemer, a developer who defined the first-person gameplay of the Halo series and would continue to bring that expertise to this. But eventually, development would be taken over by the duo Joseph Staten, one of the lead writers and cinematic directors at Bungie, and Christopher Barrett, an art director. In a refreshing change of pace, they began working on a fantasy game. Knights, swords, castles, monsters, a giant frog with goblins on its back. It was completely different from Halo, but with no shortage of ambition. In fact, they had a pretty lofty mission statement. While the Halo games were mostly linear and rocketed you from one place to another without much incentive to replay beyond the simple fact that the games are fun, this new game would encourage players to stay in its world for a long time. It wasn't enough to just create another 10-level campaign. It was going to be far grander, something that could carry Bungie for a decade.
Let's build a world where we can tell any great story we want, a place millions of people will want to visit again and again, for the next 10 years and more. A pretty lofty goal, but...
Yeah, absolutely.
But as appealing as fantasy was as a genre, Bungie still loved their spaceships. They still loved sci-fi. Soaring through the stars, shooting at aliens. Halo might have done that a ton, but it was a formula that still had a lot to offer. And it also fits right into the mystery ideas behind the game. I mean, exploring abandoned castles is cool, but so is exploring abandoned space stations, abandoned starships. Suddenly, the worlds of fantasy and sci-fi could be combined into a genre that they called mythic science fiction, which all came together with this piece of concept art, showing 3 people in cool-looking armor with cloaks and adornments not unlike medieval knights, joined by a white tiger and a spaceship. It was the exact mixture of different elements that sparked a ton of excitement and interest internally. It became what they called a postcard. And it wasn't the only one, as in an attempt to create some kind of hub space to center the entire universe, this piece of concept art was created. A wide shot of a large white ball hovering over the Earth's surface, a city built directly underneath it. Mystery begets curiosity, and boy did this make the designers at Bungie curious. What is this thing? Why is it damaged? How is it pushing back the clouds? Why would people build a city underneath it? These two pieces of concept art were the major sparks to set the design team on a path. The whole project began to take shape. This large white ball was eventually named the Traveler, something ethereal and simple to capture its feel, and the whole game was codenamed Project Tiger, in direct reference to the white tiger pictured front and center on the first postcard. But while development was ongoing for a couple years in the background, no one on the outside had any clue Project Tiger was even a thing. I mean, they had no reason to know just yet. They were all focused on Bungie's more immediate future with their last two Halo games. But of course, hints were still dropped here and there. In 2009, when Halo 3 ODST hit store shelves, fans noticed this poster you could find across the city of New Mombasa. An image of the Earth with a small orb beside it. Is that the moon? Or is it something else? Even more curious, it was joined with the simple tagline, "Destiny awaits." But the real bombshell came in April of 2010, as the promotional cycle for Halo Reach was hitting its stride and fans were waiting with bated breath for Bungie's last game in this universe. A huge announcement was made. It was revealed that Bungie had signed on to a 10-year partnership with Activision. Activision, of course, had been the publisher behind Call of Duty, which was not only the major competition to Halo, but it was also consistently becoming the most successful video game of every year. It was a huge shock to the industry. I mean, Bungie were priding themselves on their independence, and here they go finding another big publisher to work with. But it would be a different relationship than Bungie had with Microsoft. Activision wasn't going to own Bungie. They weren't even going to own the IP of their next game. It just meant that they now had a publishing agreement that would help fund the project and get it out onto store shelves once the time came. And finally, in September of 2010, Bungie's time in the Halo universe came to a close with the release of Halo Reach, a prequel that told the story leading right up to the events of the first game, completing the story with a full circle ending that was incredibly satisfying. It was also incredibly bittersweet, especially as the transition away from Halo came over the next year, as pieces were slowly but surely handed over to 343 Industries, who'd already begun development on Halo 4. One era had come to a close, which only meant the next era was about to begin. While Bungie was set to go into a bit of a public-facing blackout, hunkering down to work on this next project, they did leave fans with a couple tantalizing details, which all came in the year 2011. To celebrate Bungie's 20th anniversary, they released a VDoc on August 3rd, aptly titled "Oh Brave New World." Most of this hour-long VDoc was about Bungie's history, how the company came to be, the people involved, the games they made, including deep dives into each of their Halo entries. But while much of this is about the past and the path the studio took to get where they are today, it also takes a brief moment right at the end to give the best glimpse yet onto what they were working on next. While nothing concrete was shown off, the codename Project Tiger was revealed, alongside some pre-alpha renders of one of the worlds, and the promise that this was going to be perhaps the biggest thing Bungie had ever created.
We didn't even know how big Halo was going to get. How can anything be bigger than Halo? We'll find out.
This is where our journey begins. The journey of one studio with enough gall and ambition to create an entirely new universe for fans to delve into and experience. Through all the highs and lows, the triumphs and defeats, this is the moment that Bungie decided to fulfill their destiny. If you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot. Alright, my ghost has almost found me, so let's keep this moving. As the years continued, Bungie's ambition for Project Tiger was only becoming more apparent by the day. The art direction behind the game had found its footing, centering on the idea of nature ascendant over a lost human civilization, with influences from all over, informing the different looks and designs that would create a mountain of variety for the team. On top of the fact that it was all being built within a new game engine. Bungie had used the Blam engine ever since the first Halo game. In fact, they even passed it on to 343 Industries. But now they decided to modify it heavily to build what they needed, creating what's known as the Tiger engine, which would be able to carry the team for the next 10 years. At the same time, while they had decided that the game was going to center around Earth, Bungie was really creating the entire solar system for players to engage with. They'd be able to visit the Moon, Venus, Mars, Mercury, Saturn, each with their own concept art postcard to sell the visuals of what each world was after. There was even concept art for Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, all of which would then get translated to real in-engine maps created with a tool they called Grognok. And with a universe as big as this one, it needed to be populated with plenty of enemies to fight. Just encountering the Covenant at every turn wasn't going to cut it. This game needed more. Designs began to come together for multiple alien races, each with a visually distinct look and playstyle, which began to solidify into the 4 main alien races: the Fallen, the Hive, the Vex, and the Cabal. And famously, as has been mentioned many times by a certain YouTuber, there was also concept art for Moth People. This fed into the idea that for as big and ambitious as the game was, at its core it was still a Bungie first-person shooter. Those mechanics that they had nailed on the Halo games were still going to be at the center of Project Tiger. The shooting needed to feel good, the enemies needed to feel good to shoot at, the heads-up display went through many iterations as the game slowly took shape over the years. But while this was a first-person shooter, it was also going to be something of an RPG, because instead of players taking on one individual character like Master Chief, they were going to be able to create their own character. Customization was going to be huge. There were many different types of armor, many different weapons, but even different hairstyles, adornments. Every player was going to be able to create their own hero, even getting to choose between 3 major classes: the Titan, the Hunter, and the Warlock, each with their own visual aesthetic, abilities, and armor choices. On top of the choice between a couple different races. You could be a human if you wanted. You could be an Awoken, this pale blue elf-like kind of character. An Exo, which is just a cool robot guy. Or you could be a Tiger Man. Okay, they never quite got the Tiger Man to work, so that never made it in, but the other 3 did. 3 races, 3 classes, and tons of ways to customize within that. But while development was going on internally, very little was known about the project on the outside. The world at large had no idea what Bungie was making. I mean, they knew they were doing something, but what specifically? The only thing they really had to go off of was the phrase per audacia ad astra, which was plastered on Bungie.net, which translates from Latin to mean through boldness to the stars. It definitely evokes a particular feeling, but I'm sure fans were waiting restlessly for something more. Throughout 2012, certain details about Project Tiger got out in less than expected ways. In May of 2012, as a result of a massive lawsuit between Activision and some former developers of Infinity Ward, one of the companies behind Call of Duty, details of the Bungie-Activision contract were unsealed and released publicly. In it, they detailed Bungie's basic plan for a 10-year MMO project, with 4 games each releasing every 2 years, the first of which set for 2013, with plenty of DLC and microtransactions filtered in for good measure. And this MMO project was called Destiny, which was originally going to be the working title for the game, because people within Bungie weren't really in love with it. But after searching and searching for alternate titles that all wound up being forgotten or passed aside, Destiny managed to survive. And it was Pete Parsons, the company's COO at the time, who loved it just enough to keep it around and make it the game's official title. But that wasn't the only thing that got unintentionally revealed, because in November of 2012, a bunch of concept art got leaked, revealing tons of designs, artwork, what the title was going to look like, and even a brief synopsis of the world Destiny was going to show off. Bungie was of course a little blindsided, explicitly saying they weren't quite ready to show things off just yet, but they did decide to show something officially for the very first time. They released this piece of concept art, featuring a couple aliens grouping around a walking tank in the dead of winter. This was exciting. I mean, the mood was apparent, the vibe was immediately clear, and questions began to spur right from the moment it dropped. It's kind of the perfect evocative image to reveal first. I mean, But for anyone still chomping at the bit for something more, something bigger, they only had to wait just a few months more. As 2013 got underway, Bungie started to open the doors a little bit to the outside world. Everything began on February 11th with the beginning of the Alpha Lupi ARG on Bungie.net. This ARG would run for a week, with puzzles revealed once a day. Once attentive fans completed these puzzles, they'd get a small, cryptic excerpt teasing this new fantastical world, clearly spoken from a character or entity within the universe, leading to tons of theories about who exactly was speaking out to attentive audiences. The only hints were that each excerpt was tied to a planet in the solar system. One for Earth, one for Mars, one for Venus, and so on. It even featured the first taste of the music, once again composed by Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore, who had worked together on every one of Bungie's Halo games and were set to continue that partnership heading into Destiny. But this brief ARG was leading somewhere, because once the week was up and each excerpt was revealed, the clock turned to February 17th, 2013, where Bungie officially revealed Destiny for the very first time.
That moment where we decided that the right thing was for us to do something big and commit the entire company to it, it's a big deal.
Many years ago, there was a golden age, but something struck that pulled the solar system into darkness. Now, the Traveler has empowered soldiers known as Guardians, the player characters, to traverse the solar system again, facing off strange alien creatures who mean to wipe out the last of humanity. It revealed the scope, the scale, tons of concept art, even some brief in-engine shots of what the game was actually going to look like. The art design was incredible, the promise was exciting, and while no release date was given, everyone paying attention was already game to pick up Destiny the moment it hit store shelves. Promotion didn't stop there either, as just a few days later, Bungie made a brief appearance during an enormous PlayStation event. An event in which Sony unveiled the PlayStation 4 for the very first time. At the very end of this conference, Jason Jones himself popped on screen to showcase some more in-engine footage of Destiny, the promises of the world, the 10-year plan, and even a tease towards seamless cooperative play. Which also came with the announcement that while Destiny would launch on PS3 and Xbox 360, it would also launch with the next-gen hardware, with certain items guaranteed as exclusives for people who purchase the game on PlayStation. And not long after, in March of 2013, Joseph Staten and Christopher Barrett hosted a panel at the Game Developers Conference, or GDC, where they detailed tons of the inspirations and development process in creating this all-new world for players to explore. In seemingly no time at all, people had gone from knowing very little about Bungie's next project to knowing the true scale of what they were trying to accomplish. And as a result, excitement skyrocketed for what was surely to be one of the biggest gaming events of the decade. And things only continued from there, because in May 2013, Bungie continued the marketing in a way that followed along from their Halo games, because they released the Law of the Jungle live-action trailer. Directed by Jon Favreau, this trailer stars Giancarlo Esposito, a father reading an excerpt from The Second Jungle Book, set to the extraordinary visuals of Guardians facing down aliens across the solar system. It wasn't much, but it showed off the tone, the feel, and some of the spectacle. Like the live-action trailers for the Halo games, this brought Destiny to another level beyond just being another video game. There was no denying that this was going to be an event, and Bungie continued that presence in a major way once E3 came along in June. Bungie's presence here was insane. While most of the convention centered around the next-gen systems of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, Bungie was right there beside them with perhaps the most exciting game of the year. On one hand, at the end of Sony's PlayStation conference, Bungie revealed a 12-minute gameplay demo, showing off their iconic first-person shooter gameplay, some of the enemies, some of the weapons, but especially showing off the seamless cooperative elements, that without having to stop for matchmaking, other players can run around the same world you are, and you can join them on a whim and complete objectives together. And there were plenty of exciting things shown off, like class abilities, humorously referred to as space magic, which would separate Destiny from anything else out there, and especially Bungie's previous Halo games. It's not good enough to just shoot at guys, you gotta be able to throw a ball of purple plasma at them too. Not to mention, this also shows off Bungie's penchant for getting all-star actors to voice some of the in-game characters, because it's revealed here that your Ghost, a small robot companion, is voiced by Peter Dinklage, who of course was renowned for his performance in Game of Thrones. But the PlayStation conference wasn't the only place Bungie visited, as they also showed off the gameplay demo live in their very own booth, where an audience of 50 people at a time could see the game played right in front of them, with 6 players interacting simultaneously.
Why is the city breathing down my neck?
Why don't you put that down so we can talk?
Out here in the wild, this is how we talk.
Then you had a brief showcase at the Activision Blizzard main stage, where Bungie were able to show off a cinematic revealing each world the game planned to visit. And you had the gameplay trailer, which revealed little in the way of the story, but did reveal some of the vague setup for what your Guardian will be doing when the game releases. Now, there was a tiny kerfuffle around the online gameplay trailer, as it featured music not composed by Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore. Instead, it was new music commissioned by Activision. Martin O'Donnell was quite upset about this, wanting his music to back the marketing efforts for the game, and he felt that Activision had overstepped their bounds. But the original music for the game was still going to get a spotlight, because in July of 2013, at a Video Games Live concert, Martin O'Donnell himself conducted a performance of some of Destiny's original music. It was actually the first time he had conducted, and it was a major reveal of the track The Union, which was the second movement for the album Music of the Spheres, which would serve as the musical foundation for Destiny into the next 10 years. And it was quite something. Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore had outdone themselves once again. But they weren't alone, because they also collaborated with Paul McCartney. That's not a bit. Paul McCartney collaborated with them to create the foundational pieces of Destiny's music. Now that's crazy. Excitement around the game continued into August 2013 with an all-new VDOC called Out Here in the Wild. This continued to expand the gameplay ideas, the cooperative aspects, the class abilities, the different kinds of weapons and armor you can find, the way in which the game's gonna feel once it releases, and even the scale of the destinations.
You can go from Earth to Venus to Mars to the Moon to Saturn.
And with a release window set for 2014, which is a year later than anticipated, the clock was beginning to count down in anticipation of Bungie's next blockbuster. But while excitement was at an all-time high on the outside, people were not yet fully aware of what was going on internally. Because after all this build-up, after all this work on the game for half a decade by this point, after players got tons of knowledge at E3, everything changed. A lot of this information comes directly from a Kotaku article by Jason Schreier, a revered gaming journalist. He managed to get an inside look at what happened internally at Bungie in the summer of 2013 that had been kept under lock and key for a couple years. It all started when many at Bungie were brought together to view a 2-hour supercut of the game, featuring all of the cutscenes, story beats, practically everything about the campaign save for the gameplay. The story centered around your quest to find a robot character named Rasputin, someone who was captured by the Hive early on and taken to their enormous ship, the Dreadnought, which sits within Saturn's rings. The game would see you try to rescue Rasputin, eventually leading you to this ship during the game's third act. It was even setting up one of the eventual DLCs, where Rasputin would be revealed to be controlled by a war mind, sparking another story. Across this campaign, you'd come across several characters, including Osiris, who lived on Mercury, his robot assistant, and even the Crow, a bounty hunter roguelike kind of character, who definitely fit the suave character traits of someone like Han Solo. It was big, it was expansive, but also, a bunch of people hated it. Jason Jones especially hated it. While some thought maybe the supercut didn't do the story any justice and you needed the full game to really appreciate it, others thought it was too linear. Too esoteric is the word they used. It sent the entire studio into panic mode. I mean, what if this thing they had been making for years totally sucked? Which is why Jason Jones made the decision to completely scrap the story Joseph Staten had written and make a new one. They'd still use the assets, designs, even some of the background lore, but the story itself would be redone from the ground up, even featuring the late-in-the-day addition of a director, a menu in which you could choose your destination and fly there with the click of a button, something pitched and eventually implemented by Jason Jones himself. He also created the Iron Bar, a group featuring himself and some other creatives like Christopher Barrett and design director Luke Smith to build a new story off of what they still had. But that meant the whole development cycle had to start over to some extent. The game was being rebuilt on a wildly condensed timeline. Missions were pulled apart and stitched together in new ways, the same happened to cutscenes. Models were reused, entire characters and locations were cut completely. The whole game changed. And it caused a rupture through the entire company. On one hand, Martin O'Donnell took a sabbatical, but on the other, even more devastating hand, Joseph Staten left. He had been with the company since 1998. He was instrumental to creating the stories of the first two Halo games as well as Halo 3 ODST. He was a primary voice behind the games Bungie made, and Destiny was going to be no different. But after seeing his work suddenly pulled apart and stitched back together in a way that was unrecognizable, he separated himself and left the company, never to return. I mean, he returned to Halo a decade later, but never did he come back to Destiny. Even some of the writers he had hired for Destiny, who did stick around, were reportedly ostracized by everyone else. The exact quote was, "The story was being written without writers." Which, I don't know if you know anything about writing, but that's kind of not good. Joseph Staten's departure was eventually made public in September of 2013, and it definitely raised some eyebrows. But since details were kept mum at the time, excitement still managed to power through. There wasn't enough information to be completely worried at this point. In fact, Bungie was keeping the floodgates open on new information weekly to keep anticipating fans engaged. In October, just after Bungie released a trailer showcasing the destination of the moon, they also brought back the Bungie Weekly Update. This had been a tradition within Bungie since 2004, releasing a weekly update post keeping people aware and informed of the goings-on internally, all in the spirit of transparency. But after the release of Halo Reach, the Bungie weekly updates went away for a while, keeping things quiet. Now though, with this next game on the horizon, fans could jump over to Bungie.net once a week to get a quick glimpse of what the team was working on, which led to December of 2013, where Bungie officially announced Destiny's release date. While internally they were aiming for a March 2014 release, which had already slipped from their September 2013 date, the restructuring of the story pushed things back to September 9th, 2014, which is where the release would stay. Just under a year to go before Bungie would storm back onto the shelves with their all-new game. Unfortunately, the damage internally just kept on coming. After a bit of time had passed since Destiny's complete restructuring, Martin O'Donnell returned from his sabbatical. But reportedly he returned not fully engaged with the work, and it was beginning to hurt some of the vibes internally. On top of his growing frustration with Activision for not using his music in the E3 2013 gameplay trailer, and maybe even some trailers coming up in lead up to Destiny's release. Internally, it was believed that this tension between O'Donnell and Activision was beginning to damage things more than it was helping, especially since Bungie was set to work with Activision for another 10 years. And so, Bungie's CEO Harold Ryan reached the conclusion that it wasn't worth it to keep Martin O'Donnell around, and he got fired. This made the rounds in a big way. People raised their eyebrows at Joseph Staten's departure, but this was even bigger. Martin O'Donnell had been the face of Bungie's music for a lot of their history, and initially it seemed he didn't know why he was fired, which led to a lawsuit in the following years, which Martin O'Donnell eventually won. But considering events that have transpired since, and how Martin O'Donnell has presented himself online, it is not a mystery to understand why Bungie might want to separate from him long term. But now, this meant Michael Salvatore was taking over the music on Destiny, working alongside C. Paul Johnson to get the soundtrack done and through the door. Now, it's not like O'Donnell's work would be replaced. He created a ton of music for the game that would still be featured when its launch date arrived. It just meant that he would no longer be around for the creation of any new music from here on out. So that's two major voices from Bungie's history gone in less than a year. If I didn't know any better, I'd say things aren't going so great. But at least the promotional game continued as 2014 went on, starting with a full gameplay reveal in April 2014 for one of the game's strikes, the Devil's Lair. Now, strikes are a bit different than standard campaign levels. In Destiny, they meant more difficult levels optimized for up to 3 players playing cooperatively. They'd be separate from the main story, but contain even better loot than a standard level. This one revealed that it would end with the boss Osiris Prime, providing a tease that left eagle-eyed fans intrigued. But that was only the beginning of Destiny's promotional push through 2014, as Bungie once again made another sizable presence at E3 that June, split across both a new trailer and a complete gameplay showcase, revealing some of the backstory of this world, some of the great locations, and especially some of the things you can take part in during the game. From the campaign, to strikes, to patrols, even featuring some glimpses of vehicle gameplay, which was very exciting, a look at the Crucible, which is the new competitive multiplayer mode, and at the very end they even teased the most difficult activity the game was going to offer, the Vault of Glass.
To defeat the most challenging experience we've ever created and earn Destiny's ultimate rewards.
You think all of that is cool? Get ready, because Bungie's presence at E3 led right into Destiny's Alpha. Available from June 12th to June 15th for PlayStation players only, this allowed them to take part in the game for themselves for the very first time, exploring limited amounts of what the game had to offer, glimpses at the story, the multiplayer, the first strike where you fought against Osiris Prime, and even some of the progression and leveling systems. But while it was exciting for people to get their hands on the game a bit early, it also came with some kinks, namely in some of the line delivery, as fans immediately pointed out the stilted and awkward performance from Peter Dinklage as the Ghost, primarily this line.
The Hive haven't been on Earth in centuries. That wizard came from the moon.
Which was just the right level of ridiculous in terms of the words said and the unenthusiasm of the delivery that it became an instant quotable moment. Bungie even sold some merch about it, so that's fun. Now, this did result in some changes as the sound team began adding static sound effects to the Ghost dialogue to help accentuate its robotic nature whenever it talked.
We're in. This was one of Skywatch's old array stations, a link to the lunar colonies. We're in. This was one of Skywatch's old array stations, a link to the lunar colonies.
Eventually, things continued into July with the Destiny Beta, which you could access by pre-ordering the game from specific retailers. And this even allowed Xbox players to join. They had no access to the alpha, but this time they could jump on board for an advanced taste of what the game was going to be. And boy, did a lot of people get involved, as across the beta's 9 days online, over 4.6 million players took part, creating 6.5 million Guardians to traverse the universe and get the first taste of what the game had to offer. The game even managed to break records, as pre-order numbers skyrocketed over the summer. This game had the most pre-orders for any new IP in gaming history. Of course, it's not like people are betting on an entirely new horse. Bungie had a hell of a reputation, but that's still quite staggering. Excitement only skyrocketed from here, as promotional efforts saw no end in sight heading into September. Bungie released trailers showcasing both Mars and Venus, 2 more of the playable worlds. There was a deeper dive into the Crucible and what fans could expect there. There were even some additional pre-order bonuses players could get their hands on, like exclusive weapons. Then on top of that, there was something called Planet View, which was a cross-promotion effort with Google Maps where you could essentially go street view on the worlds of Destiny, viewing Earth, Mars, Venus, and the moon from the ground. I mean, sure, why not, right? There was even a Taco Bell tie-in, featuring a special commercial that revealed the potential to win a PS4 and a copy of the game. So that's fun. And finally, the last 2 trailers dropped just before release. On one hand, you had the launch trailer at the end of August, putting a nice bow on Destiny's promotion so far and getting people as excited as possible, complete with poll quotes from across the alpha and beta, which were nothing but immensely positive for the game. And on September 5th, just days before launch, there was an all-new live-action trailer featuring 3 Guardians taking on aliens across the solar system. It was big, it was fun, it was action-packed, and it was all set to Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin, really punching up the tone and sense of fun this game was gonna have. With the release of those trailers, it signaled to fans and the gaming industry at large that the paradigm was about to shift. Destiny was now on store shelves, available to purchase in a few different ways. They could not only buy a standard copy for PS3, Xbox 360, PS4, and Xbox One, but they could pick up the limited edition featuring a steelbook, some in-game cosmetics, and even an expansion pass, meaning players who picked this up would have already bought their way into the next expansion set to release in the next year. Because yes, Destiny wasn't going to be a one and done. This game was going to change as time went on, and this was your first chance to be able to buy in. Then you had the Ghost Edition, which contained all of that and a physical Ghost replica that you could display. If you were all on board for Destiny and willing to shell out $150, this is what you were picking up. Bungie's story had now led them here, to the big moment. After 10 years with Microsoft and Halo, and 4 years since they left that behind with Halo Reach, it was now time for players to finally experience this new universe once and for all. This was the kickoff point for a 10-year journey, and fans could not be more excited. After finally picking up a copy, it was time to pop the disc into your system and load up this experience for the very first time. The clock has turned to September 9th, 2014. Our destiny has finally arrived. Few games have had an opening as exciting as this one. Putting in this disc for the first time, loading up this new universe, and stepping into it after years of hype, and immediately being met with this awe-inspiring atmosphere. One filled with mystery and also hope. I mean, we open with 3 major sequences. We start with a pre-rendered cutscene on Mars, set in the present day where the first astronauts to land wind up discovering the Traveler, a great white ball that is actively terraforming Mars right before our eyes. We're introduced to the Traveler through the second scene. We're told how it benefited the human race and sent us out into the stars, all until something called the Darkness came and caused the collapse. An event that rocked the entire solar system to its core. And finally, on Earth, we see a ghost circling a post-apocalyptic location in old Russia, scanning dead bodies for something. Until finally, it finds us. It wakes us up from our deadly slumber, sending us on a mission to escape this location and fully join this new universe. There's a lot the game throws at us, but it's also not revealing the entire thing right away. We're left with just a bit of information to tantalize us and a million questions going forward.
And you've been dead a long time. So you're gonna see a lot of things you won't understand.
But the biggest question of all is, do we get answers? Well, no. There's nothing worse than the sinking feeling of realizing that something you've been anticipating is dropping the ball. But the longer you play this game, the more apparent the cracks begin to appear. And these aren't just everyday cracks either. These are foundational load-bearing cracks. As players continued their way through the campaign, they began to realize the terrible truth. The story of Destiny is really bad. Mainly because there is no story. After years of Bungie excelling in the story department, not just with the Halo trilogy, but also the oft-discussed Marathon series from the 90s, this is an area they've nailed practically every time. But here, despite players asking a million questions about this universe, dying to know more so that they can get super invested like they were before, they're instead left with even more questions like, what is actually going on? What is my role in this story? And who are any of the alien bad guys I'm shooting at? Nothing is ever explained, nothing ever changes really, and we're just shuttled from location to location fighting bad guys we don't know anything about on a quest we don't fully understand. But let's start with what we do know. The Traveler was once more powerful than it is now, but due to the collapse caused by the Darkness, it's become dormant. Humanity has been left with one final city on Earth, protected by a giant wall and guardians. See, in its dying moments, the Traveler created ghosts to seek out dead bodies and turn them into soldiers wielding the Traveler's light, as it's called. You are a guardian, waking up without any memories of your past life, but given powers that can help you join other guardians already out there to fight back against the Darkness and shoot aliens real good. And since it is you who is going to be taking part in this universe first and foremost, you get to choose what kind of guardian you're going to be. You can be a human, unawoken, or an exo, and you can choose between 3 classes: Hunter, Titan, and Warlock. For this, I chose to be an exo Warlock, because if you give me the option to be a robot, I'm gonna be a robot. And this guy, of course, takes design influences from the most obvious place, Optimus Prime. Hey, I'm nothing if not a one-trick pony. Now, since this is the very first choice you make, you kinda have to just go based off of vibes. You don't really know exactly what makes each class different. It takes playing through the game and experimenting a little bit to figure out what playstyle you like the best. Because while the main mechanic is shooting, and that's universal across all 3 classes, there are differences in plenty of other areas. Everyone's got a different jump, Hunters are faster, Titans are heavier, and Warlocks can more easily glide to their death. Then you have abilities like your grenade and melee, which are both on a cooldown. While you can't punch people all the time, you get a slightly more powerful melee ability when that meter is full. But the big thing is your super ability, which, like your grenades and melee abilities, is chosen by your subclass. Every class starts off with one subclass, each representing one of the 3 elemental powers the game has to offer. Hunters start off with the solar subclass Gunslinger, which comes with the ever-popular Golden Gun. Activate that and you've got a couple flaming shots to melt your opponents. Titans start off with the Arc subclass Striker, which allows them to do a big lightning-fueled Hulk smash called the Fist of Havoc.
Enemy captured Zone C.
Warlocks then kick off with the Void subclass known aptly as Voidwalker, and its super, the Nova Bomb, which is definitely as cool as it sounds. But of course, these are just the supers you start off with. Once your character reaches level 15, you're able to unlock a second subclass, able to utilize powers from one of the 2 other elements you didn't have before. Hunters get the Arc subclass Blade Dancer and its super Arc Blade, which allows you to activate a lightning dagger and slice people up no problem. Titans get the Void subclass Defender, which gives them the ability to create a big purple bubble shield to defend themselves and allies. And Warlocks get the Sunsinger subclass, allowing them to use solar energy for the Radiant super, which just increases the power and refresh rates of everything they have at their disposal. As you progress through the game, these subclasses get upgrades and enhancements, and you're really able to customize them as you level up and play around with different combinations and different builds to fit what you're after. These are abilities that you take with you onto the various destinations across this game's story, heading into combat zones to take on the litany of enemies you have to face. But not every area is built for combat, because things start with the Tower, a social space at the edge of the last city on Earth. This is where you'll run into other guardians, talk to vendors, accept quests, bounties, buy cosmetics with in-game currency, all sorts of stuff. From there, you'll jump out into the solar system to fight on these semi-open world maps, each with different corners that are explored as the campaign continues. First up, you have the Cosmodrome in Old Russia, a location that looks utterly fantastic. With its day-night cycle, ruined structures, towering spaceships, there's a lot to enjoy. And here you'll mostly be taking on the first enemy faction the game has to offer, the Fallen. Something I like a lot about all of Bungie's history is how they name things. There's a certain naming convention to each enemy race here that creates a distinct theme, something that they've done for their entire lifespan so far. I mean, all of the Covenant vehicles in the Halo games fit a ghostly theme. Ghosts, phantoms, spirits, wraiths, Destiny is no different in that department. Each enemy race has a specific theme that they stick to. For the Fallen, the names of each character mostly fit their roles within the hierarchy. You have Dregs, the lowest on the totem pole, Vandals, who are a bit tougher and more slippery, Captains, pretty self-explanatory, Servitors, these big purple eyeballs that serve the rest, and Shanks, these small drones that could become a headache if left unchecked. They even have their own tanks called Walkers, which are absolute beasts. The second major location is the moon, which I think has to be my favorite in the whole game. I mean, there's nothing quite like traversing the moon of all places. While it is mostly gray, the texture of it is fantastic, and seeing the Earth in the sky is nothing short of awe-inspiring. But where it also thrives is the fact that as you continue through these missions, you dive deeper beneath the moon's surface, uncovering these enormous alien structures that have been dug underground. This is where you'll encounter the second enemy faction, the Hive. This monstrous faction of enemies who are definitely pulling more from the fantasy half of the game. Bungie even described them as being zombie-like. While you can encounter these guys on Earth, they mostly hang out on the moon. You got the Thralls, who will charge at you with extreme prejudice. You'll be tempted to melee them to take them out, but be careful about their cursed variants, because those guys can explode. Then you have Acolytes, the basic soldiers, Knights, the bigger, more imposing force, Wizards who can fly around and oftentimes have energy shields, Ogres are these big lumbering beasts who shoot a big laser out of their eye, and then you have the Shrieker, a kind of stationary turret which is usually immune unless you get close enough for it to see you. The trade-off is that once it does see you, it'll try to murder you. After that, we launch to Venus, which despite it being a literal hellscape in real life, is one of the most shockingly beautiful locations in the game. It takes something scary and turns it into a paradise that's been ruined, which makes it scary in a different way. Here you'll encounter a robotic race called the Vex. In terms of naming conventions, these guys are my favorite, because they're all named after mythological creatures of some kind. You got goblins, the basic soldiers, hobgoblins who like to attack from a distance, harpies who float around in groups, you have a cyclops, a kind of stationary mega turret, and the Hydra with a built-in rotating shield. And those guys are tough bastards to take down, unless you hit them with a Nova Bomb. Now, the Vex are a bit different than the other enemy factions, because not only can they teleport slightly if they want to, but their critical hit spot is in a different place. All of the other enemies' weak spots are in their head. It's what makes headshots so satisfying. But shooting a goblin in the head doesn't kill it outright. You gotta hit it in the white spot in the stomach. That's where they're weakest, which is true for goblins and hobgoblins, but not the Minotaur, which is one of the only enemies in the game without a critical weak spot. You just have to gun them down whichever way you can. Finally, the fourth planet you visit is Mars, featuring the lumbering space rhinos known as the Cabal. All of their names are based on the history of ancient Rome. You got legionaries, the basic soldiers. You got the phalanx with large shields that you have to shoot around, centurions who are even tougher, and the Colossus who can just lay down fire on you like nobody's business. But they do have their own small slippery guy known as the Scion. So, space rhinos aren't everything for those guys. There are tons of enemies to take on in the game, and some of the real joys when they begin to take on each other. Sometimes these armies will clash and start fighting each other, and you can just sit back and watch the fireworks. It's really Bungie's staple, clashing enemy AI, which they have flexed since at least the days of Halo CE. Now, the enemies do get tougher as the game goes on. They level up as the campaign continues, so you gotta be careful. It can get pretty easy to die out there. See? At the very least, you can nearly instantly respawn, because when you die, your ghost brings you back, giving an in-universe explanation for how you can respawn in-game, which is neat. That being said, pretty much every story mission has a darkness zone, where it functions more like a traditional video game. If you die, you go back to the last checkpoint. But while enemies get tougher, so do you. There are a million different weapons in this game, but they all fit into different weapon types that then fit into different weapon classes. Because while you can carry up to 30 weapons at a time, you can only equip 3. In your primary slot, you have stuff like the auto rifle, which is pretty standard, a pulse rifle, which fires in bursts of 3, the scout rifle, which fires one shot at a time and is built for shooting from a distance, and the hand cannon. Pretty self-explanatory. Your special weapon slot includes things like the sniper rifle, the shotgun, and the Destiny original, the fusion rifle, which... yeah, it does that. And finally, you have your heavy weapons slot, featuring the machine gun and the rocket launcher. There's even a brief moment where you get access to a sword, allowing you to slice and dice like nobody's business. It's unfortunately temporary, but it's great to use and it sounds awesome. Each weapon class has its own ammo type, so you gotta be on the lookout for different kinds of ammo as it appears on the battlefield. At the same time, in order to acquire new weapons, you have to collect engrams. These are sometimes dropped by enemies, and on many occasions have to be decrypted. So after you're done with a mission, you can pop over to the tower, talk to Master Rahul, and unlock whatever weapon lies inside. Even these fall into different classes. You have common gray items, which is what you start with, uncommon green items as the next level up, rare blue items, which are even better, and the legendary purple items, which are some of the cream of the crop in many ways, even if they're still not the absolute best just yet. Now, the engram system isn't exactly perfect. You know, there's a chance you could unlock an item that's too high leveled for you, so you have to wait to get to that level in order to equip it. You could unlock something that's not as good as what you have. That's a bummer. You could even pick up a legendary engram and somehow get a blue out of it. I mean, as a result of all of this, Master Rahul became one of the game's greatest villains. Just give me the purple item that was in the engram, dude. Thankfully, you do often get something good, and the visual progression you go through as the game unfolds is really quite cool. You start with some of the worst looking stuff, and then you slowly manage to get better and better gear as the game continues. The less common it is, the better it looks, and the more customizable it is, since every weapon and every piece of armor gets more upgrade perks the better it is. Each of which can be unlocked by gaining experience, which also drives the central leveling system, taking you from level 1 to level 20 as the game continues. Vehicles are also quite significant. While not as varied as the vehicles in the Halo games, you do have some stuff, like your Sparrow, which you can equip at any time to drive around the various maps. Sometimes you come across the Fallen Pikes and Cabal Interceptors, which have built-in weapons, so that's cool. And you have a spaceship, which does practically nothing. You can switch it out for something that looks better, but it's really only used to take you from one planet to another. There isn't actually any benefit to having one ship over another beyond how it looks. It's unfortunate coming off of Halo Reach and seeing actual ship combat there, to seeing the ships here which are basically just a glorified loading screen. But they are the exact device that takes us from one planet to the next as we progress through the story. But that just brings us right back to the central crux of this campaign's issues. There is no story. Most stories will start you at the beginning and then end at the end. Destiny, however, starts in the middle and then also ends in the middle, but like across the hall. Once you put all this in the context of the fact that it was completely redone about a year before launch, things start to make a lot of sense. In a world where the player is desperate to get answers and learn about this universe, the story weirdly seems to be acting as if you already know. It almost feels like a follow-up to the original story that we never got. One of the most egregious examples has to be with the Stranger, who is teased a couple times on Earth and on the Moon before we finally get a proper introduction during a cutscene on Venus. And once you get there, it's like, finally, here's this character who clearly knows a lot and is about to let us in on the details we don't know yet. So tell us, Stranger, what's going on?
I don't even have time to explain why I don't have time to explain.
Are you serious? Really? That's crazy. Even worse is this scene starts mentioning people and places that we don't know, yet the game is acting like we do.
Have you heard of the Black Garden?
We've heard the legends.
Now we going to war. What do you mean we? Nintendo?
No. If we're going to find the Black Garden, we need to see the Awoken.
Who are the Awoken? Why do we need their help? I didn't miss anything, did I? I've been paying attention, I think. Turns out the Awoken are a separate group who live out on the Reef, as it's called. They're led by the Queen and her brother, who are at least given some amount of introduction here. Their dialogue is really kind of stilted and awkward, but they do have some amount of clashing personalities. The Queen is willing to help us, while her brother clearly hates our guts from the moment we show up.
I have shown you benevolence, Guardian. Should the Awoken ever need an ally, I will call on you. And expect you to answer.
She's saying you owe us, Guardian.
It is crazy, though, that the Reef is a location on the director, but the only thing you do there is 2 cutscenes for the main story. Other than that, there's nothing there. This stuff at least brings some amount of drive to the story, though. Our goal becomes to find a Vex Gate Lord so we can open a gate to the Black Garden and kill its heart. Because it's going to kill the Traveler, I think? The specifics aren't nailed down in the slightest, but at least there's like a North Star to point to. We gotta get to the Black Garden. Got it. It's a shame this only comes through in the second half, because before that we kinda have nothing. Which is doubly a shame because the level design also leaves a lot to be desired. This also clearly took a major hit after the development restart in 2013, because while there are around 20 story missions in the campaign, they're all mostly the same. You go to a place on one of the open world maps, you traverse an area you've likely already been to, you deploy your ghost sometimes to hack into computer terminals, you shoot a bunch of guys, maybe even take on a slightly harder boss, and at the end you get some loot out of it before finally, you leave. These levels are barely structured, they're bare as hell, and they get repetitive quickly. At a certain point you realize, oh, I have to do another holdout section while my ghost hacks a computer? Alright. And it's not like Bungie is incapable of doing level design more intricate than this. That was apparent in the Halo games and even the first level of this, where we see them build up some of the spookiness of these areas. Things break, enemies crawl out of the floor, they jump from the roofs, they're doing all sorts of stuff you wouldn't necessarily expect that makes things interesting. But after the first level is done, they stop doing any of that. It just becomes, alright, time to shoot more guys. The shooting is fantastic, which holds this up a lot, but the level design itself is incredibly bare. The third major area that I think was given the shaft by the late stage development restart is the cast, because this game has one hell of a cast of actors. I mean, we got Lauren Cohan as the Stranger, we got Peter Dinklage as the Ghost, which unfortunately still doesn't sound that great, even with the static filter they put over it. Players did start referring to him as Dinklebot though, so there is that. We even got Bill Nighy as the Speaker, who is at the center of the other most infamous cutscene in this game. A cutscene that feels poised to establish some of the details of this universe, and in fairness it does give us some stuff, but it also feels like it's just the tip of the iceberg. This is supposed to be the starting point that we'll continue on throughout the story, but it's actually the only time we get a proper scene with this guy.
I could tell you of the great battle centuries ago.
So he could tell us, he just doesn't wanna right now. It's all good, we'll let him rest.
I don't even have time to explain why I don't have time to explain.
A lot of the vendors also get little to do here. They're all voiced by plenty of great actors, but they aren't given anything fun to say, which is especially true for the Vanguard. These are the stewards for each class, essentially. Depending on which of the classes you choose, you'll be reporting back to one of these three as you level up your character. We got Gina Torres as the Warlock Vanguard Ikora Ray, Nathan Fillion as the Hunter Vanguard Cade 6, and Lance Reddick as the Titan Vanguard Commander Zavala. Three people who can have tons of vocal presence and have killed it in other roles, but here they'll just say a line or two while you're visiting them in the tower. Hell, a lot of their dialogue to you is written in a text box. They're not even saying these things out loud half the time. Thankfully, once you start diving into the strikes, you start to hear from these characters a lot more, as they become the stewards of the mission dialogue during these tougher activities. Commander Zavala especially gets some time to shine during his speech that introduces the Cerberus Ve 3 strike on Mars.
Whether we wanted it or not, we've stepped into a war with the Cabal on Mars. So let's get to taking out their command, one by one. Valis Ta'arik. From what I can gather, he commands the siege dancers from an Imperial land tank outside of Rubicon. He's well protected. But with the right team, we can punch through those defenses, take this beast out, and break their grip on Freehold.
Hell yeah, dude, that's got me geared up. Let's play some Destiny. Eventually, everything leads to the final mission of the campaign where we enter the Black Garden, which, like a lot of places in this game, looks absolutely incredible. I mean, that wide shot moment where you see the scale of it for the first time? Extraordinary. We fight through a whole bunch of Vex soldiers and we make our way to the Black Heart, as it's called. Alright, let's see what it's got cooking up for us for this major encounter. In a stunning move, the Black Heart activates 3 giant Minotaurs. That's right, 3 of the same enemies we've been fighting since Venus, just bigger this time. At least these guys have weak spots on their stomach like the rest of the Vex, but still. 3 enemies we're vastly familiar with becoming the ultimate final boss? Feels like we could have done something a bit bigger than that. And then, once you've locked in and killed them, you're done.
The Shroud of Darkness is lifting, and light returns to the Traveler. The speaker is calling us home.
So that's it, huh? I mean, now we're getting this big cutscene with a speech from the speaker, the Traveler is looking all bright and shiny as ever, the Stranger is even gifting us her weapon, all before leaving, still without giving us any answers to our questions.
I don't even have time to explain why I don't have time to explain.
I guess that wraps up our story, as we fly away from the tower, setting ourselves up to go off on another adventure somewhere, somehow. That right there is the end of Destiny.
Some hope for the future.
Your ears do not deceive you. That is Paul McCartney singing an original song for this game. We already knew he contributed to the soundtrack, helping add cues and strings to the music of the spheres, but he also created an original song called Hope for the Future, which plays over the game's end credits. Even a couple months after the game's release, there was an official music video for the song, featuring the man himself being projected as a hologram for Guardians to listen to. It's an odd combination, but hey, what are you gonna do? Initial reception to Destiny was, well, not very good. Critics praised the gunplay and shooting, as well as the art direction and enemy variety, but the story was such an enormous sticking point for so many people out there. There was no avoiding how piss poor, bare bones, and lackluster it was on that front. I mean, what did we even do? I guess we saved the Traveler by destroying the Black Heart, I think? I honestly don't know how the Black Heart was killing it, to be honest, but I guess by destroying the 3 Minotaurs, we've saved the universe. Go team. But after several hours of gameplay and millions of questions left unanswered, players only had one last question that they were dying to know. What the hell happened? What went wrong at Bungie to create this story? Eventually, some people digging into it were able to get answers on the troubled development and the late-in-the-day story restart, but it just leaves the game with this feeling of missed potential. We'll never truly know if the original story would have been any good. We'll never truly know if it would have captured people the same way the Halo stories did. But the phrase that keeps popping into my head is, it would have been complete. We would have had a beginning, middle, and end to a story in one corner of the universe, blowing it open so that we're on board to keep exploring it over the next 10 years. We would have had more locations like Mercury, Saturn, even the Reef was a playable area according to some of the trailers. We would have gotten more characters like Osiris and his assistant, the latter of whom's character model was repurposed for the Stranger. The Crow would have been a big part before he was of course repurposed for the Queen's brother, which explains why he's wearing hunter armor despite not being a Guardian. Allegedly, the original story would have sown distrust with the speaker. His motives would have been called into question, which is exactly why they cast Bill Nighy, someone who could play into that really well. There was supposed to be ship gameplay, allegedly, likely building off of where the team began with Halo Reach. We'd also learn major things like the origin and motives of the Traveler, and we discover that the Black Garden actually exists within the Traveler, giving that leg of the story some real heft that could have helped it out. Now, remnants of this original version of the game do exist. You can seek some of this stuff out. The problem is, none of it's actually in the game. As you progress through the game, you might get a notification at the bottom of the screen saying you've unlocked a Grimoire card. This will then direct you out of the game into Bungie.net, where you can read the cards you've unlocked, opening the door to the immense lore and backstory of this universe and the millions of stories within that were drummed up during this game's development. By all accounts, the material of these cards is absolutely fantastic. The rich history and stories there are thrilling, and even led to the rise of successful channels like My Name is Bife, who would occasionally break down and decipher the intricate lore within these cards. There was a lot to dive into regarding the different areas in this game. The campaign mentions something called Rasputin a number of times, and you explore structures tied to him on a number of occasions in the Cosmodrome. But what exactly is Rasputin? The game doesn't really tell you. The Grimoire is where you can learn that Rasputin was built as a war mind, a weapon system with super advanced artificial intelligence to defend the solar system during the Golden Age. But once the darkness arrived and the collapse happened, Rasputin became this relic of a bygone era. Though even in the present story, there's a lot of merit to Rasputin. Even if its motives are largely unknown and there's reason to be afraid, its weaponry is something that can be utilized on top of being feared. But even with how cool or interesting some of this information is, none of that takes away from the fact that this stuff is simply not in the game. You have to leave the universe in order to read about it, and that's a barrier to entry that's too high for a great many people. It's not even that high of a barrier, but it's high enough, you know? It was actually a bit of a joke at the time that Destiny's stories sucked. I particularly remember some of the memes that were made. Do you remember those old memes that were like, still a better love story than Twilight, because Twilight was an easy target to pick on? Well, there was one in 2014 that said, at least Twilight has a better story than Destiny. To be worse than the thing that's famous for being bad, that's devastating. But there was no ignoring how successful the game was financially. This became the single greatest launch for a new IP in gaming history, as in its first 5 days, Destiny managed to garner $325 million in sales, an absolutely monumental feat. This was an enormous game, which is why the disappointment was so loud, since so many people were here to play it and see it for themselves. But even among the disappointment, Destiny managed to find a large player base within the millions that had decided to take it on, for a few major reasons. 1, the base gameplay was a lot of fun. 2, there was a promise of further expansion, so even though the initial launch had its downsides, people were like, just wait, it'll get better, I promise. And 3, even after finishing the campaign, there's plenty to do. Destiny is unlike a lot of other games. Most games like this will be over once the campaign is done, but here, the campaign is just your way in. The campaign's going to take a couple days to plow through, at least if you're going at a fairly leisurely pace, which opens the doorway to the part of the game that's going to carry you along for months going forward, because now you enter the grind. Destiny is built around a simple experience leveling system. Completing the campaign pretty easily gets you up to level 20, which is the cap. But from there, you can continue to play and upgrade your gear even beyond that, becoming the strongest possible Guardian you can. And there are a bunch of different ways to do that. Each of the open world maps feature patrols, these small little quests that you can take on for some experience points. Public events also come around on these destinations, random events that you and whoever else is around can take on with the promise of earning some loot once all is said and done. Bounties or smaller tasks you can sign up for and complete on the side. Then you have the real money, the strikes. The 3-player activities that take the challenge a step above the campaign levels and features a major boss fight towards the end. These activities offer some of the best loot and even some unique currency that you can then take back to the tower. Vanguard marks are one of the major currencies you can gather by doing public events, strikes, and the daily heroic story missions and weekly heroic strikes, which take the difficulty to another level again. You can then take these marks to the Vanguard and purchase all new legendary gear to help you level up further. From there, you can even talk to a number of other vendors who provide tons of options that you can purchase with in-game currency. Amanda Holiday is the shipwright, allowing you to pick up new ships for your travels. Banshee 44 is the gunsmith, providing new, unique weapons. Tess Everest sells exclusive emblems, shaders, sparrows, and ghost shells, which are fantastic for individuality and customization. There are 3 factions within the tower, each with their own perspectives on how things should be run. You have Dead Orbit, New Monarchy, and the Future War Cult. By taking on a class item from any of them, you can complete tasks with a promise of faction-exclusive gear. And then you have Lord Shaxx, who oversees the Crucible, Destiny's very own PvP game mode. Of course, the company behind Halo, a game famous for its competitive multiplayer, wasn't going to leave those roots behind for Destiny. This time, you can take your Guardian as it's built and face off against other Guardians in various game modes, which can then earn you Crucible marks. Much like Vanguard marks, you can bring these back to Lord Shaxx and purchase some more legendary gear. There was even a special Crucible mode called the Iron Banner, hosted for 3 weeks at a time. This saw Lord Saladin sending you into even more challenging Crucible activities. The first event kicked off just a month after the game's launch on October 7th, and would be a recurring event appearing in the tower every so often with its own unique loot. But that's not the only place you can get better stuff, because you can also find Xur, Agent of the Nine, a vendor who only appears on weekends in various random spots around the tower. Websites were immediately set up to find where Xur was each weekend to let people know where to find him, and he would sell some of the best items in the game, exotics. Exotics were exceptionally rare in the game at this point. To get an exotic was to strike gold. It was crazy. And here comes this guy selling some for his own special currency, strange coins. Exotics were so good you could only equip 2 at a time, 1 piece of armor and 1 weapon, so make your choices wisely. And on Xur's second weekend in the tower, he was selling a weapon called the Gallarhorn, an exotic rocket launcher. But considering that this was so early into the game's lifespan, people didn't quite know what to expect out of Xur. They weren't chopping at the bit for him just yet. Not to mention, considering you could only wield so many exotic items at a time, many of those who did know about Xur decided to pass on getting this rocket launcher in exchange for getting a primary exotic weapon, something they'd use way more. There was tons of stuff to do. Even Nightfall strikes would be factored in. Strike playlists which increased the difficulty even further with the promise of better rewards. Exotic bounties would become available, allowing you to retrieve some of the best exotic gear. You could even go to this random cave in the Cosmodrome that was probably the easiest way to farm a bunch of engrams. I mean, enemies would just swarm out and drop legions of stuff. This became known as the infamous Loot Cave, and was a popular spot on the Cosmodrome before Bungie patched it out. But for as much as this game offered in terms of activities, there were still numerous problems. For one thing, there were certain things in the game that were exclusive to PlayStation players only. There was a Crucible map that only PlayStation players could play on. There were 2 exclusive exotics, the Hawk Moon and the Monte Carlo. There was even an exclusive strike called Dust Palace on Mars. Several things that only PlayStation players could get access to. So despite having such a relationship with Xbox previously, this Bungie game turned its sights toward PlayStation players to give them just a couple extra bonuses that no one else could get. Now, these were timed. PlayStation would only have these as exclusives for about a year, but that was long enough to make players on Xbox a little irate. Why don't they get some of this stuff? In any event, completing these activities, earning new gear, all of that is in service of leveling up your character to the true level cap. While level 20 is the highest you can get through experience, by acquiring better and better gear, you can actually increase something called your light level all the way to 30. An extra 10 levels dictated by the strength of your gear. Build crafting was huge as well, as each weapon and each piece of armor had an upgrade tree that you could level up by gaining experience. But even then, once the upgrade was available, you had to purchase it with in-game currency, like Glimmer, the main currency in the game, as well as planetary materials. Materials you could find on each of the destinations, either in plants or in loot chests all over the place. So not only did you have to grind to get the gun in the first place, you then had to grind to upgrade it to its fullest potential. Now, the grind did bring along a number of frustrations for players. A lot of people would wind up getting stuck at level 29 and essentially be soft-locked for a long time before finally breaking through to level 30. Not to mention, the optimum way to level up became tedious rather quickly. There might be a number of activities to take on, but be prepared to do some of the same ones over and over again. Which leads to the major question, to what end? Why are we leveling up our guys so much? I mean, for the most part, it's just to flex on our friends that we have the best gear, but there is a pinnacle activity that players could take on only after grinding their way up to its skill level, because everything leads to the most ambitious activity in the entire game, the raid. Raids were nothing new in the world of MMOs. I mean, World of Warcraft has had raids for years, but for a first-person shooter like Destiny, this was new territory. On September 16, 2014, 1 week after the release of the game itself, Bungie launched the Vault of Glass. This is a 6-player activity, sending a fire team to Venus to dive deep underground to face off against the toughest challenge the game has to offer. And unlike strikes, there is no matchmaking. There's no chance to randomly pop into an activity with other people. If you wanted to run the Vault of Glass, you needed to have 5 other friends to play it with you, which was controversial at the time, but it does make some amount of sense because you need communication. This isn't the kind of level you just throw on a Sunday afternoon to have fun for a bit, at least not initially. The Vault of Glass is a multi-hour excursion into the caverns beneath Venus, featuring incredibly difficult enemies, more intricate mechanics, even new weapons like an Aegis shield, something you can take on to cut through a boss's immune energy shield. There's even a stealth section where you have to avoid these special harpies called Gorgons. They see and hear everything, so make your way through this labyrinth quietly if you want to get to the next area. And finally, once you reach the Vault of Glass itself, players are faced with the central boss, Atheon, Time's Conflux. For those more deeply entrenched in the lore, they know that the Vex are a time-traveling race, and here that gets some play as part of the mechanics, as Atheon sends players to the past and the future during this fight, something players will have to figure out in order to take the boss down. The Vex are trying to bend time and change reality around you, but for every victory you manage to achieve during this last encounter, the game reassures you with the simple message, Guardians make their own fate. People didn't know what exactly to expect with the raid in this game. It was a challenge that felt unprecedented for a game of this type. It almost feels like a different game compared to the main campaign. After a campaign featuring almost no level design to speak of, now Bungie's coming in with something way more intricate. The first team to ever beat it, known as Prime Guard, took a whopping 10 hours to complete the whole thing front to back. They were the first to finally defeat Atheon and overtake the Vault of Glass once and for all. For hardcore players, the Vault of Glass was the best thing they could ask for. In fact, it's often referred to as the activity that saved Destiny. Many players were down in the dumps after the campaign, and many others were dissatisfied with many aspects of the grind that came after. But once Vault of Glass launched, it was filled with mysteries, additional corners, difficulty, all sorts of stuff that kept them coming back again and again and again. This is what made the game worth it for a great many players. There was a weekly reset on the loot pool so you could continue to run it every week for a chance to earn the best gear the game had to offer. Some of the best exotic items you can get to show off how much of a god gamer you are, including but not limited to the Vex Mythoclast, an exotic fusion rifle. This thing became a beast in the Crucible. It was an unstoppable destructive force. If you had one of these, you could clean house, and if you didn't have one of these, may God have mercy on your soul. At least, that was until Bungie caught wind of how good it was and nerfed it. There were criticisms for loot distribution, because it often felt like the worst person on the raid team got the best stuff. You know, the randomized drops weren't great, so there was definitely room for improvement. And of course, once players managed to memorize the encounters and understand how they worked, it became a lot easier. Not to mention the cheese that could ensue, because players quickly discovered alternative ways to beat Atheon that Bungie was not necessarily intending. The most infamous one was you could just knock Atheon off of this platform into the abyss to die immediately. Sucks to suck for that guy. But even with its flaws and exploits, the Vault of Glass was a greatly entertaining and thrilling aspect of the game, and capped off an exceptional experience for those who decided to go the extra mile and play everything the game had to offer. Overall, Destiny's launch was a mixed bag, to say the least. Incredible gameplay and game modes mixed with questionable loot distribution, and a half-baked, bare-bones story that I'm sure turned a lot of people away without a second's thought of coming back. But for those that stuck around, they saw something within this imperfect game. They saw promise. They saw hope for the future, as Paul McCartney would sing. And even bigger than that, they loved to spend time in this world and its atmosphere. There was something unique to Destiny that no other game was able to capture. There was nothing like hearing that menu music when you booted up the game, or wandering the Cosmodrome and seeing it turn from day to night. Destiny had something special, and players were hopeful that this early freshman slump could be improved with enough time. The question inevitably became, what happens next? Well, of course, the promise laid out from the very beginning of this journey was quite ambitious. Destiny was going to be carried for 10 years. Now, was there enough in the base game to justify that? No. But there was enough to keep fans engaged until the game would see its first expansions. While internally, the team at Bungie was hard at work on a major expansion codenamed Comet set for release in 2015, there were 2 smaller expansions set for release before that. The first of which was announced in August of 2014, before the base game's launch, titled The Dark Below, which apparently was in development for a very short amount of time. It was only brought about in a few short months with apparently 9 weeks of crunch to get it done. No doubt as a result of the restructuring of the story and the year 1 plans of the game getting changed rather significantly pretty late in the day. But after a couple months of silence on that front, eventually promotional efforts for The Dark Below kicked off on November 21st, 2014, introducing Destiny fans to their very first expansion.
6 of us went down into the pit. Only one crawled out.
This prologue reveals that this first expansion will center around the moon, and particularly the Hive, introducing us to a new big bad guy, Crota, said to be the son of Oryx. Deep lore stuff going on here. Hopefully it translates to an effective story. Promotion continued just a couple days later with a full 4-minute breakdown of what players can expect out of the expansion. From a new character, to new story missions, to new weapons, Crucible maps, a new strike, and even a new raid. Which was finally all capped off with a full trailer just days before the expansion was set to launch. Kind of putting a bow on this brief string of promotion, capturing everything players could expect from this first foray into Bungie's longer plan. Once the time came, after the last few days of excitement went by, players could now pay $20 to get access to this expansion, or they could shell out $34 and get the expansion pass, which included access to the second expansion set for release in the spring of 2015. So you're getting 2 for the price of 1 3/4. The clock had turned to December 9th, 2014, where just 3 months after the base game's release, it was time for players to jump back in and see the first step in Destiny's long-term future.
Now you must face what lurks in the dark below.
One of the first things players are greeted with when booting up the Dark Below for the first time is the brand new vendor Eris Morn, who sits at one corner of the tower's courtyard and is the guiding character throughout the new campaign. She was once part of a 6-person fire team who went into the Hellmouth on the moon to stop Crota, a hive god and the son of Oryx. She was the only one to survive the encounter and spent a hell of a long time underneath the surface of the moon getting corrupted by the hive and her vengeance towards Crota. This makes Eris immediately one of the most interesting characters in the Destiny universe. I mean, it's not like many others have much going for them, so the bar is pretty low, but here's a character that has something going on internally for people to latch onto. And now the Hive are threatening to bring Crota to Earth to wreak havoc across the solar system. So Eris is sending you to fend them off and stop Crota's rise. All in a grand total of 3 story missions. Yeah, there isn't much to this expansion. It hardly even fits the definition of expansion, really. I mean, technically it does, but it's not really worth the $20 price of admission. The 3 story missions can be beaten in probably an hour if you're leveled up enough. They mostly involve traversing locations you've been to a bunch during the base game, killing some more of the same enemies you've been facing, and then maybe there's a boss at the end. You might take down Sardon, the Fist of Crota, or encounter Omnigul, the Will of Crota, all before shooting down a big crystal to make sure Crota doesn't escape into our world. I mean, it's fun, in the same way Destiny has been fun since the beginning, but there's nothing more to it outside of a little bit more Destiny. It's not the groundbreaking fix-all expansion that maybe the game kinda needs at the moment. But for those who were already on board with what Destiny was, it's hard to go wrong with more of that. And at the very least, there is some new endgame stuff after completing the main campaign that begins to justify the price tag a little bit more. Once completing the 3rd and final story mission, Eris will send you on a quest to kill 3 more of Crota's minions across the Cosmodrome, all to unlock the new strike, the Will of Crota, where you'll embark to kill Omnigul once and for all. It's kind of the first time that a strike has become part of the central story. All of the vanilla strikes were kind of their own mission off the beaten path, but this was the natural next step after completing the central campaign. Now, there is another strike that's more separate called the Undying Mind, but that was another PlayStation exclusive, meaning Xbox players got the shaft once again. Unfortunate. The Crucible was expanded with 3 new maps. There's a new level 26 strike playlist that players can embark on for some of the best loot. There's even a slightly expanded loot pool with new exotics for people to chase after and get their hands on, which all helps them reach the new level cap, as now players can take their light level all the way to 32. That's right, you got 2 more levels. How's that? All of that leads you to the crowning event in this expansion, about the only thing you could argue justifies the $20 price tag, the new raid. Crota's End is yet another 6-person activity that takes you and 5 friends into the depths of the Hellmouth on the moon to face off the Hive, and even sees you entering the Ascendant Plane for the very first time. Adding to the fantasy elements, the larger figures within the Hive gods, each have their own throne world that they inhabit on another plane of existence. This raid sees us enter Crota's throne world to kill him once and for all. This is the mission Eris Morn and her team failed to complete, but now you have the chance to finish it and end Crota before it's too late. Now, while the Vault of Glass was built around its mysteries and different hidden corners that you could explore, Crota's end is much faster and more frantic. You've got to rush from one place to another, doing your best to take on the different mechanics like the weight of darkness that can slow you down to devastating degrees early on, and after a few major encounters you're left to face off against Crota himself, using the best gear your team has to kill the Hive God. Team Invigorate was the first ever team to take down Crota, managing to beat the raid in just 6 hours after it came out, which is quite a bit faster than the Vault of Glass raid, but that was in large part because players knew more of what to expect. They knew what raids in Destiny could be, and were a bit more prepared for the challenge laid in front of them. But soon enough, players slowly began to realize that Crota's end was actually just much easier than Vault of Glass. There were fewer encounters, some of which were much smaller and less intricate. Not to mention, Crota's end became the very first raid that someone was able to beat solo. Slayer Rage, also known aptly as the Legend himself, was able to dedicate enough time to the raid to figure out mechanics on his own to take down Crota one-on-one. This was an event within the Destiny community, let me tell you, as initial disbelief turned into amazement. No one ever thought a raid could be soloed, and yet here was Slayer Rage getting it done. Insane stuff all around. Crota's end quickly became a more trivial task as time went on, with some players even referring to it more as a strike instead of a full-blown raid. And of course, players quickly figured out how to cheese it. There were about 1,000,001 exploits that players discovered pretty quickly that allowed them to beat the encounters probably faster than Bungie was anticipating. Like unplugging your router during the final boss so you can go ham on Crota without him becoming an active combatant again. Players also discovered that the Gallarhorn was an incredibly powerful and useful weapon against Crota at the end. It just had the right punch to hit Crota right where it hurt and cut him down until his defeat. Which was of course fantastic for players who had that weapon, but a lot of players didn't. During the one weekend that Xur sold the Gallarhorn in the tower, a great many players skipped it over for something else, if they even knew Xur was selling it in the first place. If only they knew how important it would become just a few short months later. Because now that the Gallarhorn's strength was known, finding a team to take on the raid became significantly more difficult. Third-party methods to assemble 6 players to take on Crota became rather limiting. If you didn't have a Gallarhorn, you weren't getting onto a team, which was unfortunate. Thankfully, there were other methods to obtain the weapon. The Vault of Glass could drop it every now and again, but that was still exceptionally rare. Ultimately, once all is said and done, Crota is defeated. You and your team have finally killed him, ridding his influence on the universe once and for all. You've accomplished what Eris Morn's team could not. Overall, the Dark Below is not quite the slam dunk Destiny needed after launch. It's just a tiny bit more that feels like it could have been available from the jump. Clearly, there wasn't a ton put into this expansion to launch things forward, so the player base became a little bit worried about how year 1 of Destiny would ultimately shake out. There was one interesting thing about the whole expansion though, and that's that your ghost doesn't say one line of new dialogue. All of the new mission dialogue comes from Eris Morn. The ghost doesn't talk once. I wonder what that could mean. With the Dark Below having come and gone and players once again experiencing the endgame materials and the grind to level up to the highest possible degree, eyes slowly but surely began turning to the future. There was of course set to be another expansion titled House of Wolves due out in the spring of 2015, with consistent rumors of something even bigger later in the year. Various patches hit Destiny in the early months of the year trying to adjust quality of life concerns, but really the entire team behind the scenes was working on the big drop that was coming up, which finally, after months of rumors, leaks, and speculation, the full reveal for House of Wolves arrived on April 13th, 2015, giving players their first glimpse at expansion number 2. This prologue teaser conclusively revealed that the House of Wolves expansion would center on the Fallen as the enemy race, specifically a faction of them that were once under the command of the Awoken Queen before they betrayed her to kick off this story. So we're not just getting an expansion for the Fallen, but also to the Awoken from the base game, with the promising reveal that the Reef would become open to all Guardians to complete this new quest. It would become the new social space. New characters, new objectives, new events, all could be accessed through this new area. It's not just about the tower anymore. The Reef is going to be the place to jumpstart this new campaign. And all of this was capped off with a final trailer putting everything together in one nice 2-minute package to sell people on what the second expansion had to offer. There was plenty of criticism for the Dark Below and how bare bones it was as an expansion, but House of Wolves at least looked like it was offering a bit more. And finally, after just 5 months since Destiny's first expansion, Bungie was back with a little bit more to help continue the game further into its first year. The clock had now turned to May 19th, 2015. So get ready, the House of Wolves have betrayed the Awoken, and it's your job to seek out revenge. This expansion is not huge. In many ways, it also struggles to justify its $20 price tag. But the campaign is at least a little bit bigger than the Dark Below. We got ourselves 5 story missions this time, which are quite tough as well. They have their difficulty spikes, though I wonder if that's just because of the sheer amount of enemies they throw at you. You're up against an army in some of these encounters, it's crazy. But at least the game knows to start us off with some fun, as things immediately open with Pike gameplay as we take on a fallen spider tank. Just getting to the fireworks right off the bat, you love to see it.
Last week I was delivering court messages. Today we're delivering explosions. I love field work. Get after them, Guardian.
There's even a new temporary weapon called the Scorch Cannon. It's dropped sometimes by fallen captains and only has a minimal amount of shots, so you gotta make them count. But if you do, this thing is a beast on the battlefield, let me tell ya. Of course, the biggest new addition to the game is the new social space, the Vestian Outpost. Located in the Reef, featuring some more incredible art direction and a great expansion into the Awoken. These characters who we visited briefly during the base game now have a little bit more to do. We even learned the Queen's name. She is Mara Sov, and her brother is Uldren Sov. Finally, it's not just the Queen and her brother, we kinda know something about them now. On top of that, there are a handful of new characters. You got Master Ives, the new Cryptarch, Brother Vance, a disciple of Osiris, that's big, and the 2 main characters Varix and Petra Venge, who will be your guide through this expansion story. And continuing from Eris Morn, those last 2 characters also have a lot more going for them than anyone in the base game. Petra wants to get back out into the field for some excitement, and loves getting to be a part of this mission to hunt down the House of Wolves. And Varix is a vandal with no love for the Kells, or leaders of the Fallen houses. His kind of insight into how the Fallen work is really interesting. We're still only scratching the surface, but it's a hell of a lot more than we had before. Not to mention, he's got some of the campaign's best lines.
They will try to kill you. Kill them back.
Though, like the Dark Below, since Petra and Varix are doing all the talking, your ghost once again remains completely silent. I'm starting to notice a pattern now. What's going on there? Although I'm not paying attention to that for too long, as we also have a new weapon type, the Sidearm, which falls into the special weapons category. Nothing like getting a new type of gun to fire away at this game's many enemies. You even get awarded one upon completing the campaign. There's also a couple new enemies. Now, while we're mostly facing off against the same Fallen, Hive, and Vex that we've been fighting since this game launched, there are a few new enemies to take on, mainly variants of Fallen Shanks. In the base game, they were just floating drones who you had to shoot down. Now you have Repeater Shanks with built-in miniguns, Tracer Shanks built for long-range attacks, and the Exploder Shanks, with live grenades that will go off if they get too close. These are the guys you gotta look out for. If you're not paying attention, yeah, you'll die. Everything in this story revolves around the hunt for Skolas, the Kell of the House of Wolves. If you take him down, it's all over. It's not like it's the most inspiring campaign ever, but it's a step up from what we've had, surely. Most of the level design still isn't all that memorable. It's still mostly going to a place and killing a bunch of guys, but there is one platforming section that sticks out, where you not only get to see incredible art direction on Venus, but you also have to play it right. These platforms go through a cycle of vanishing, then reappearing, so you have to wait for the cycle to run its course before you can blast through. House of Wolves even lives up to its namesake as an expansion by expanding some of the existing maps. There are a couple new areas to explore, added onto the patrol map so you can see different corners of these locations that weren't there before. Namely, there's one level of the campaign that takes you back through the very same location that the base game started on, taking you right back out to where this whole journey began. There's even a level that takes you into the Vault of Glass. While it's certainly not as challenging as the Vault of Glass raid, it still brings a bit of hurt.
One more oracle.
Ultimately, the story's 5 levels come to a close when you defeat and capture Skolas. It makes for a fairly tough boss fight that leaves you at least a little satisfied. The story isn't really anything to write home about, but sending you on a journey to capture a guy, then ending with you capturing said guy, it's an A to B story that at least pays off what it sets up. And it all leads you, once again, into the endgame. Now, unlike the base game and the Dark Below, House of Wolves features no new raid. In fact, this is the only expansion in Destiny's history to have no raid. That, on one hand, is fairly disappointing for the players who eat that stuff up, but the expansion does offer in some other areas. There's a new strike called the Shadow Thief, where you explore a new corner of the moon and hunt down Tannix the Scarred to take him down. There are 4 new Crucible maps, though once again one of them is exclusive to PlayStation. That's a bummer. There's of course new exotics and gear, but there's also 2 rather significant corners of the endgame section of this expansion. On one hand, you have the Prison of Elders, a whole new arena game mode where you and 2 others face off against wave after wave of enemies, even facing off against bosses from across the game so far. You can tackle it with people you are grouped up with randomly through matchmaking, or with 2 friends, which is especially helpful with the harder challenges this mode has to offer, as you can take on the Prison of Elders at different levels to acquire better gear and level up your guy to reach the all-new light level cap of 34. It's fairly exciting, and something the game was in need of, a new mode for players to jump into and, of course, grind. But then, on the other hand, you have the Trials of Osiris, an all-new Crucible game mode overseen by Brother Vance in the Reef. It's only open on weekends with refreshes every week, and it features one game mode, Elimination, where 2 teams of 3 players face off against each other. If any player dies, they're out. If the whole team goes down, that's the end of the round. It provided a whole new challenge for Crucible players and a new loot pool. But soon enough, it was also discovered that it opened the door to something else entirely. Because if you manage to achieve a flawless victory, winning 9 rounds and losing 0, you get access to another new social space. That's right, the Vestian Outpost is not alone in this expansion, as you can also visit the Lighthouse on Mercury, a whole new planet separate from the rest of what we've seen so far. While there isn't a ton here, it does look fantastic, and even allows players to access a glowing golden chest, featuring Trials of Osiris themed gear. This was of course heavily sought after by players, as they decided to grind their way to the top during Trials to make their way here to get some of the best gear this expansion had to offer. Not to mention how exciting it was to have a 3v3 Crucible mode. Since so much of the rest of the game was built around 3-person fire teams, this was perfectly set up for a great many teams out there to duke it out during these, well, Trials. Trials of Osiris is historically one of the most beloved modes in all of Destiny's history. The weekend event of grinding the game mode with friends became something players chased for a good long while. That being said, House of Wolves is not a very groundbreaking expansion. In a lot of ways, it's just more Destiny once again, which is getting a little frustrating because the game is still in need of a jumpstart that this didn't really offer. Some players were becoming quite worried after House of Wolves. Sure, there were bright spots, but there wasn't nearly enough being done to fix the core issues. And given how long those issues had existed, the expiry date on some people's interest was sooner than they probably expected. But internally, Bungie knew that. Bungie was well aware since the launch of the base game that things needed to change, that the community had many fundamental issues with the game that had to be worked out. One thing you can always say about Bungie: they're listening. which sometimes can be reassuring, and other times it can be an alternate way of saying, shut up already. Small patches had been made throughout the year, with some of the bigger adjustments coming alongside the Dark Below and House of Wolves, but none of that really changed the bigger, more fundamental issues. To fix those, Bungie wound up taking advice directly from some of the developers behind Diablo 3, a game that also had a rocky start but wound up redeeming itself in the eyes of its player base with expansions that improved many of the deep-rooted problems. They, of course, were also under the watchful eye of Activision, so it was easy to trade lessons back and forth. It was incredibly illuminating for Bungie, and it gave them a clear path forward to redeem Destiny in the eyes of the public, which was all going to center around the game's first major expansion. It would be the third total expansion, but neither Dark Below or House of Wolves were going to be quite this big. Work on this expansion, codenamed Comet, began in late 2013, before eventually getting restarted in March of 2014 and scaled down even further from there, with some major pieces moving back to the eventual Destiny sequel. And as the project began to take focus, two major players within Bungie began to take charge, leading the team forward into this new chapter. Luke Smith had been working at Bungie for a long time, ever since 2007 during the days of Halo 3, and he had already been the design lead on Destiny with a heavy hand in the Vault of Glass raid. Now he was promoted to the creative director for this expansion, with Mark Noseworthy serving as the executive producer, and he'd been working with Bungie since the days of Halo Reach. Under their hands, Project Comet would take shape. The goals for Bungie were clear. Tell a much better story, expand on the characters, give players more of a reason to keep coming back to this world, remove the randomization of loot so there's an actual reason for why players get the gear they do, and smooth over the progression system to make it both easier to understand and also more fun. All of which was going to be built around one of the many cut locations from the original plans for Destiny, the Dreadnought. A hive ship resting in the rings of Saturn, which would be an all-new location for this next expansion. Now, a lot of this was going on in secret behind the scenes, with Bungie instead directing focus towards Dark Below and House of Wolves. But eventually, just 1 month after House of Wolves launched, Bungie would visit E3 to pull the curtain back and fully reveal what they had been working on.
His name is Oryx, the Taken King. And he's coming for you, Guardian.
On one side of Bungie's E3 presence was a full reveal trailer for the expansion now known as the Taken King, introducing the central conceit that Oryx, the father of Crota, is seeking revenge on us for killing his son. He's even amassed an all-new army of Taken soldiers to wipe us out. It's a simple and easily understandable hook, and one that especially appeals to players who've been following along with the game so far. It's like, yeah, I did kill Crota. Now his dad is pissed, so let's kill him too.
Oryx is coming, Guardian. You got his attention. Now, go get his head.
And on the other side was a full 8-minute VDoc breaking down this expansion in even greater detail, revealing a great many insights into the design and gameplay of the Taken, how they promise to change up the fight going forward, on top of the new destination, the Dreadnought, new Crucible modes, and in the most exciting announcement, every class was getting a new subclass. Which means, yes, for the first time since launch, all 3 classes are going to get new super abilities so you can lay waste to the battlefield in all new ways. Excitement for the Taken King skyrocketed after this, as promotion continued into the summer with a trailer highlighting the entire journey of Year 1 and how the Taken King was going to test Guardians in ways they've never been tested before. There was a prologue cinematic release to set the stage for the new expansion story, showing Oryx and the Dreadnought arriving at Saturn, entering our solar system for the first time, which even showed off an impressive amount of scale, introducing a small probe dwarfed by an enormous asteroid that is then revealed to be pebble-sized when compared to the imposing Dreadnought. I mean, this thing is insane. And finally, 3 trailers would cap off the promotional cycle heading into the Taken King's release. There was a launch trailer and cinematic trailer revealing glimpses of the story to get fans enticed. And finally, there was an all-new live-action trailer called Evil's Most Wanted. Set to Black Dog by Led Zeppelin, this trailer once again featured the same 3 Guardian characters from the base game's live-action trailer, as together they board the Dreadnought and take down some Taken soldiers all on a quest to defeat Oryx himself, even featuring some iconic lines of dialogue.
Just couldn't wait, could you?
For what? Papa Bear's a no-show. He's right behind me, isn't he?
Oh, man.
Promotion for the Taken King was the biggest it had been since the release of the base game. Bungie was clearly selling this as the big one. This was the turning point. This was the moment. And they wanted to get the word out to make sure everyone knew how this was going to shake things up. But in a surprising turn of events, players could find out quite a bit about how things would change about a week before the Taken King officially dropped. Because on September 8th, 2015, Bungie updated Destiny to patch 2.0, which came with a number of major changes. There were UI upgrades, the director got a bit of an overhaul and design shakeup, leaving room for the new destination with the Dreadnought. And the progression system saw a major overhaul. Before, Destiny's progression was built around 3 main numbers. You had your experience meter, which capped out at level 20, your light meter, which as of House of Wolves capped out at level 34, and then finally the defense meter, taking all of the defense numbers from each piece of armor and adding them all together in one neat place. But now, the experience meter was going to be upgraded to cap at level 40, with players' existing light level transferring over to that. So if your light was at level 34, now your experience is at level 34. And the defense meter would combine with the light meter to become the new light meter. Instead of climbing just to level 34, your light meter would cap all the way up to 320. This number was decided by averaging out the power and defense numbers on all of your gear. Weapons, armor, even your ghost shell, all would count towards the light level, which would be the main driving force for players during the endgame. The most surprising thing about this patch, though, was that it recast the Ghost. Peter Dinklage, one of the most criticized aspects of the base game, was out, and Nolan North, a voice actor with a resume the length of the Great Wall of China, stepped in. But that didn't just mean Nolan North was going to be voicing the Ghost going forward, it meant that all of Peter Dinklage's lines from the first game were completely replaced. Dinklebot was entirely removed from the game, save for like one line that Bungie failed to patch out. So even playing the original campaign missions, you get Nolan North from front to back.
And you've been dead a long time.
So you're going to see a lot of things you won't understand.
Excitement was surging now. A large portion of Destiny was overhauled in preparation for the new expansion, giving the game a much-needed fix to some of its base mechanics. Now, players could head out to physical or online stores to purchase the biggest expansion Bungie had made yet. This was even backed by the increased price tag of $40. Not quite the price of a full game, but double the price for both Dark Below and House of Wolves. Players could purchase the expansion in a couple different ways, from the standard digital download to the collector's edition, featuring a steelbook case and other small pieces of gear to help you get invested. The Legendary Edition was by far the most appealing to new players jumping on, as it contained the base game, Dark Below, House of Wolves, and the Taken King all in one disc. This was a big deal. This was the moment Bungie wanted to finally prove themselves and this game to the entire world. After a rocky launch and less than stellar first year, the Taken King had arrived to light the beacon into the future, kicking off Destiny Year 2. The clock had now turned to September 15th, 2015. So get ready, pop that disc into your system because it's time to get taken. This expansion opens with one hell of a statement. Things kick off with an enormous pre-rendered cutscene featuring the Awoken army taking on Oryx and his army of hive ships, the Dreadnought chief among them. We got some ominous narration, we got some cool action, it's like a Star Wars space battle brought to Destiny, and we get one rather big moment. Oryx, in one major stand, lights up the Dreadnought's main weapon and absolutely vaporizes the entire Awoken army, seemingly killing off both Marasov and Aldrin Sov in the process. These were major characters during the game's much maligned base campaign, and this expansion was essentially opening by saying, we're gonna leave that behind and do something much better.
Guide them, my hidden friend. It is all up to you now.
This isn't even the last we see of the Dreadnought because, of course, it becomes the main new destination for this expansion, and it's a ton of fun to explore. I mean, the hive architecture, the gothic atmosphere, there are certain areas of this place that might just be some of the best looking places in the entire game. After spending a year traversing the same 4 planets again and again, introducing a new location was a massive breath of fresh air. It's not the only breath either. The opening mission of this expansion takes place on Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, as we infiltrate a Cabal base. But something's wrong. The Cabal are running away, evacuating. They've clearly been spooked by something. These strange rifts appear across the walls, Cabal are dropped to their death in broken elevators. The place is falling apart at the seams, leaving us to ask, what is going on here? What are they so afraid of? All until it's revealed that they are afraid of the Taken. The new enemy type, Oryx's own personal army made up of various enemies from the other alien races in the game. Oryx takes them and gives them a new facelift, setting them all up against you. Now, the fact that these are reskins of existing enemies might be a little disappointing for those hoping for a wholly new enemy type, but they have tons going for them. I mean, their look is fantastic, this black ghostly figure, their animation is jittery, like their essence is being pulled apart before your eyes, and they come with a bunch of new characteristics. Taken Knights can blast you with fire, Taken Scions can duplicate themselves, Taken Phalanxes can use their shield to knock you back, Taken Vandals can create bubble shields if you put the pressure on too much, Taken Captains can launch this ball of darkness at you, and believe me, you're gonna want to get out of its way. Taken Goblins can shield nearby enemies. Taken Hobgoblins have these projectiles orbiting around them that will occasionally launch towards you. And Taken Centurions will generate these purple balls that slowly approach you. So be sure to shoot those out of the air before they do too much damage. There's just a whole new spice of life to the game with these new enemies now in play. They may look similar, but in many ways this is a 5th faction of enemies, adding to the game's library. And luckily for you, there's also one major new way to take them down, as each class gets a 3rd subclass. After the first mission is complete, you'll be given a quest by your Vanguard leader. It sends you off on a 2-phase mission in the solar system to unlock your new subclass and your new super all in one go.
What does it mean to be a hunter? I say it's all about where you belong.
Hunters get the subclass Night Stalker, which allows them to harness void energy and unlock the Shadow Shot super, which is in essence a big purple bow that you can shoot at enemies. You can blow them away, tether them together, damage them significantly. It's fantastic.
What does it mean to be a Titan? As a Titan, you are a part of the city in a way no warlock or hunter could understand.
Titans get the Sunbreaker subclass, allowing them to harness solar energy and bring out the Hammer of Sol, a super that lets them rip out this ultra-powerful flaming hammer and throw it at enemies. It's big, it's destructive, it's all it really needs to be.
What does it mean to be a warlock? Power. Only warlocks understand true power.
And finally, Warlocks get the Stormcaller subclass, allowing them to channel arc energy into the new super Storm Trance, which really turns you into a one-man lightning storm. You rush in, activate the super, and vaporize enemies like your Emperor Palpatine. The great thing about this, beyond each super being a ton of fun to play around with and the new upgrade trees that the new subclasses get, is that the game gives you time to just go wild. During the mission where you unlock the new super, it recharges at a record pace. So as soon as it runs out, you can activate it again to get that taste of power. It's awesome. And once it becomes viable during the main story missions, you'll feel more powerful than you ever have before. In many ways, this is the coolest super for each class, and it even allows them all to have one subclass for each element. Before, every class only had 2, but now they all have access to Void, Solar, and Arc abilities. Not to mention the motivational and kinda kick-ass music you get as part of these introductory cutscenes. While both Martin O'Donnell and Paul McCartney are long gone from the music creation pipeline, Michael Salvatore, C. Paul Johnson, and now Sky Lewin are here to bring about a bunch of new pieces that continue this game's musical hot streak. And while this particular piece is primarily played as an introduction to our new subclasses, given that the title is Bow to No One, a line echoed by Mara Sov at the start of the campaign, and its melody was also used for the track Mara's Theme, it also very easily doubles as the theme for the Awoken Queen. So that's neat. But the real showstopper for this expansion, and the aspect the entire thing is riding on, is the story. And it is a hell of a lot stronger than anything we've seen in this game so far. We're up against a clearly defined threat with Oryx. We killed his son back in the Dark Below, now he wants payback. And he's got a whole ship and army behind him to get it. The characters in this expansion are also much stronger. For the first time, it really feels like the Vanguard characters are utilized. They were kind of nothing vendors before this, but now we get to see them be actual characters. Ikora and Zavala get a bit of a chance to define themselves. Even Eris Morn becomes involved, building right off of her role in the Dark Below. As a vendor, she's even in a new location under the stairs heading towards the Vanguard, bringing her closer to Central Command in a way. But really, it's Cade 6 who steals the show here. Voiced by Nathan Fillion, he brings this roguish, Han Solo-like charm to the game that was sorely missing, and it allows him to have a real personality for people to get attached to and care about. He's funny, he's witty, he's not totally comical, there's still practicality, but he's having fun. And with him being one of the main guides through this campaign's story, there's plenty of time for him to stretch his wings and show off who he is.
But Zavala's got sign-off on all launches. Need a log while I'm letting it go.
Stargazing tour? Okay. How about an unsanctioned op, using modified stealth tech, to infiltrate a dreadnought above Saturn's rings, so we can knock out its weapons, create a transmat zone, and send in the cavalry.
How about test flight?
On top of that, building off of the advancements in the Dark Below and House of Wolves, the vendors giving you this story's missions are able to talk to you with some amount of personality. Gone are the days of reading the text that's just been written out for you. These characters are finally coming alive to let you into the universe, which is great.
We need a stealth drive. I've got one hidden in the...
Cade, what are you whispering?
Nothing? Nothing. I'll contact you in the Cosmodrome.
But while other characters get expansions, your character becomes a blank slate. Not that there was much to your Guardian to begin with, but now your Ghost is the one doing all the talking. Your Ghost isn't just your buddy who you can talk to, he is now talking for you. Because your Guardian does not speak at all during this expansion. In fact, they haven't spoken since the end of the base game, which in one way does allow you to put yourself fully into this character. They are you, essentially, but it also deprives them of having anything interesting in their own right. It's a double-edged sword. At the very least, the game's making up for it with far better presentation and level design. As mentioned, the first level of the story is really strong in both of these areas. It even introduces a new mechanic for scanning things in the environment. While before you were forced to scan a bunch of stuff to progress the levels, now you'll occasionally get a little notification in the top right-hand corner of the screen telling you something is nearby. You then have the option of pulling out your Ghost and scanning it for a bit of additional information. It's totally optional, not at all intrusive, and a fun addition for those who want to dig in and learn more. And the fantastic thing is, they don't even have to leave the game to get it.
It's Oryx. These statues, everything here was created before Earth was formed. I wonder how many worlds Oryx has taken.
That's not the only thing your ghost is useful for either, as on the Dreadnought you'll find yourself encountering these deep chasms with seemingly no way to cross, until you bring out your ghost, highlighting hidden paths that you can't see any other way, just changing how traversal works at certain key moments. But you might be saying, well, the base campaign of Destiny had a strong start too, and then the rest of it kinda sucked and was boring. And that much was true, but the Taken King isn't like that. While there are a couple small stretches that are a little padded, almost every level here has got something special about it. Cade's Stash, the second main level of the campaign, is the best mission the game has had up to this point. It sees you return to the Cosmodrome, which is a location you've been to a million times by now, but you get to explore a whole new corner. You get to climb up one of the colony ships. You rise up higher and higher, fighting Fallen and Taken the whole way, ascending into the sky. You get a new vantage point on the area, there are obstacles and things you have to get through that don't necessarily involve shooting guys, and there are a couple fun tricks the game pulls on you. Oh man, I forgot they could do that. The mission Lost to Light seems pretty standard. You know, you go to the moon and shoot a bunch of guys. And after shooting a bunch of guys, you get the standard mission complete screen. It's a little underwhelming until...
Eris? Cade? I think we've lost them. Something's blocking our signal and our transmat.
Infection! Your light dies here.
Oh, we're not done yet. Oryx arrives, spawning in a legion of Taken that are way too strong for you to take on, so you have to run as far as you can. And suddenly you spend the rest of the level fighting your way back up to the moon's surface. It takes your pre-existing knowledge of how these levels operate, it uses your own security and the fact this means you're done to completely catch you off guard. It's one of the coolest things this game has done. It's so great. And it's eventually topped by what happens in the mission Last Rites, which is where Destiny once again tackles a stealth level. We of course saw a stealth section in the Vault of Glass, but now that had been brought to the central campaign. You enter the Ascendant Realm, returning to Crota's throne world, and you're immediately cloaked. You're invisible, the enemies can't see you. So now you're going through this encounter to progress the story without shooting anyone. But you do still have to be careful. They might not see you, but they can smell you. So stay out of those red rings or else they'll get you and you're done for. It brings a complete twist on the gameplay that is a total shock to the system, and it rules. Finally, everything builds to the level Regicide, the last level of the main campaign. This is where you face off a couple different bosses, which can be pretty difficult even if you're at the same level they are. And finally, you take on Oryx himself.
At last, I will have vengeance!
We've been fighting our way towards him this entire time, so this encounter is properly climactic, properly huge, and properly satisfying. It even concludes with us entering this weird pocket dimension to take on the last leg of the fight. And once it's all said and done, once you've worked Oryx to the bone, he's finally defeated. You've managed to shut down the Taken King. And after all of that, we get one last scene with Eris Morn. She breaks down Oryx's sword, revealing a purple shard within, leaving us with one last ominous moment to take us home.
I have accepted my fate. I will not fail.
But while many questions were raised about how cryptic this ending was, with people speculating on if Eris Morn was going to betray us, the truth behind the scene was deceptively simple. Eris's narration here is just piggybacking off of Mara Sov's narration from the opening cutscene. Back there, Mara said that it was all up to her hidden friend to find a way to stop Oryx, and that perhaps the Guardian, aka you, would be the key. Now, Eris is saying that Mara was right. It's just the bookend on what Mara was talking about. Eris was her hidden friend, and the mission to stop Oryx was successful. I guess, given the way these scenes are set up, the only question really left to ask is, could Mara Sov still be alive? I wonder. But with that, we've completed the main campaign for the Taken King. We're not quite reaching the same heights as a Halo campaign. This does feel somewhat like a one-act play. You know, we set out to kill this guy at the start, and then at the end, we do. There isn't much that changes between those 2 points. There's just a couple obstacles to pad out the quest so we can level up a bit more before we get there. But while it's not flawless, it is a substantial step in the right direction. After the floundering nothing burger of a story from the base game, we now have something tangible to grab onto. There's a complete story here. It's not groundbreaking, but it's all we need right now. And reviews echoed that. People all around were singing Bungie's praises. This was a big return to form and a beacon of hope for Destiny's future. It's the best story the game has told yet, with the biggest moments, the best set pieces and level design, and for all of those reasons, it became a really good time for new players to hop onto Destiny. And that's coming from experience, because this is the part of the story where I come in. Like a lot of people, I knew about Destiny long before it came out. I was at least somewhat familiar with the Halo games, so when I saw this poster in my local EB Games saying, "From the creators of Halo," I was interested. I didn't wind up buying the game at launch, but I did hear about the troubles the game was going through at that time. I didn't know all the details, but I knew it was a big deal and a lot of people were talking about it. But once The Taken King came out and reviews began to turn around, the time came to finally pick the game up. And while it was obvious from playing just how rough the base campaign was, I didn't have to wait a year to kick off The Taken King. So it was a pretty direct line to get through all 4 major campaigns in one big go. There was now a lot of game here, and even if it wasn't perfect, it was worth the price of admission. You get a lot of bang for your buck. Not to mention, even after finishing the main campaign, there was plenty of endgame material to chew on. In fact, there's more endgame stuff here than there's ever been before. After completing the main story, you'll immediately be given a handful of quests that will set you up for the next step of the journey. The very first thing you'll do is place down beacons across the Dreadnought for patrols. After doing that, the ship now becomes a proper 5th destination with other Guardians running around doing various tasks. The patrol space on board the Dreadnought is also incredibly alive. Not only is the art direction incredible with tons of hidden corners to explore with mysteries to uncover, but there's also a built-in public event space called the Court of Oryx. By offering a specific type of rune, you are able to activate this event and face off against a bunch of challenging mini-bosses and enemies to your heart's content. The different runes manage to impact the difficulty of the encounter. You can take it on solo, or more likely, other players will see this going on and decide to help out. And upon completion, everyone gets a little bit of extra loot to carry them along. There are 4 brand new strikes that you can take part in, although one of them is exclusive to PlayStation players. Who could have predicted that? There are 8 new Crucible maps complete with 3 all-new game modes. There are a bunch more story missions after the campaign, and while they're not as intricately detailed, they do reward you with tons of great stuff, namely the new currency Legendary Marks. The original Destiny currencies of Vanguard Marks and Crucible Marks were done away with and combined into this more streamlined currency. Legendary Marks were now the things you could gain from these tougher challenges to purchase new legendary gear from vendors across the tower. Though do be aware, some of the levels here can be pretty tough, especially the mission Entropy's Pinnacle, which will throw you into the weeds with a metric ton of enemies that will kill you again and again and again. Maybe it's me being bad at the game, but I don't think there should be this many guys. There was a significant quality of life change with this expansion too, simply called Infusion. Before, if you had a weapon that was more powerful than your current one, that was it. It was a stronger weapon based purely on stats. So sucks to suck if you like the weaker one more, the stronger one's stronger. But here in the Taken King, you can take the weaker piece of gear and infuse it with the stronger gear to level it up a little bit. You didn't have to leave it behind just because the number was smaller. Now, there were a couple kinks with this. For one thing, it was expensive, but it also didn't quite level up your gear all the way. Say the piece of gear you like is at 265, and you want to infuse it with something at 280. Well, it won't go all the way to 280, it'll only go to 277. It gets you most of the way there, but not quite. This was certainly confusing, and people had to use online infusion calculators in order to figure out just how good this would be for their own gear. At the very least, it meant that the stuff they liked didn't have to be thrown out right away in favor of something stronger. It now had the ability to get upgraded. At least if it was year 2 gear anyway, because any gear from year 1 was capped at 190 and couldn't go any higher than that. This practice, called sunsetting, on one hand encouraged players to find new gear and kept the meta from becoming too stale, but it also left some bitter because they were forced to leave some of their previous gear behind that they'd spent so long trying to acquire. It's always a double-edged sword with this game, let me tell you. At the very least, even outside of the Dreadnought, patrol spaces have been reinvigorated. Some of these same areas we visited a million times have been given a new spice of life, because now, at seemingly random intervals, the Taken will appear. They'll spawn in small numbers at first, but if you and some others kill enough of them, a Taken Lieutenant will appear. Killing him will drop some loot and make you feel accomplished for helping to clean up these planets a little bit. And all of this is given yet another bit of new life with the new weapon type you can acquire in the game, a sword. Now, there were brief moments before where you could temporarily wield a sword, but now you're given a brief quest line to forge your very own permanent weapon. Eris Morn extracted this crystal from Oryx's sword at the end of the campaign, and with both her and Lord Shax's help, you're able to create your own sword with it, a sword that now sits in your heavy weapon slot. This did mean it was only usable if you had heavy weapon ammo, which in some ways doesn't make that much sense. Like, why do you need ammo to use a sword? But I guess in-universe it can kind of work if you think of the ammo number more as like a durability number. You know, you can use your sword for a set number of swings before it breaks, and then you need heavy weapon ammo to restore it. In any case, it became a ton of fun to slice through enemies at every turn, and added a whole new level to the gameplay that we didn't have before. On top of all of this, there was a ton of lore for players to dive into. Destiny loreheads were eating fantastically well with this expansion. Now, given that the Grimoire was still in effect at this point, you still have to leave the game to read a bunch of this stuff, but what was there was incredibly fascinating, with the biggest expansion to the lore coming in the Books of Sorrow. When exploring the Dreadnought, you can collect these calcified fragments hidden in various corners. With each one you collect, you unlock a different piece of this book. And within it is revealed a huge chapter in the life of Oryx and his sisters. However many billions of years ago, there were 3 sisters on the world of Fundament: Orash, Zero, and Sathona. They were set to live unremarkable lives until a prophecy of cataclysm forced them to give in to something called the Deep, uncovering worm gods which granted them immeasurable power and armies to control. This resulted in the birth of the Hive as we know them. Orash switched genders from female to male to become Aurix, before further events led to him renaming himself again, becoming Oryx, the Taken King. Zero became Xivu Arath, the Hive god of war, and Sathona became Savathun, the Witch Queen. Separately, they became some of the strongest and most fearsome leaders in the entire universe, conquering worlds left and right. For those interested in the deeper intricacies of how this universe works, the Books of Sorrow gave you the best insight yet into the history of the Hive, the story of Oryx and his sisters, and gave the current goings-on of the expansion so much more weight than they already had, with some incredible lines to boot. One of the ones that sticks out to me is when it's describing something a bit ethereal. The exact line is, "It is a fire without fuel, burning forever, killing death, asking a question that is its own answer, entirely itself." Like, whoa, that is some dense stuff going on here. But what does it mean? What is it actually describing to us? The final shape. Every aspect of this endgame material managed to carry players along. Patrols, strikes, public events, lore, exploration, and it was all in service of gearing them up for the crowning achievement of this expansion, King's Fall. The new raid. The biggest raid Bungie had made for this game so far. While the central campaign might have had you defeat Oryx, he never truly died. The way it works is that Hive Gods can actually retreat to the Ascendant Plane, to their throne world, upon death. Oryx's throne world, though, is a tiny bit different. A piece of it has been built into the Dreadnought itself. The entire ship is not the throne world, and the entire throne world is not in the ship, but some of it is. And while the ship is heavily defended, once you're inside, it becomes a bit easier for you to travel to the throne world within. This is what King's Fall is all about. 6 players will embark onto the Dreadnought to enter Oryx's throne world and face off some of the biggest, most difficult challenges this game has to offer. From facing off the War Priest, this Hive general, all the way to Golgoroth, this giant Taken ogre, to even these 2 witches who are actually the daughters of Oryx. All before finally taking on the big man himself. And big is the operating word here. Since we're in his throne world, we're playing by his rules, and he manages to grow to Titan scale. He's enormous, the mechanics are intricate, there's lots going for this final boss fight. The raid was unlocked on September 18th, just 3 days after the expansion was released, and within just 7 hours, the first team led by Gothalion was able to complete it for the very first time, marking the end of Oryx's reign on the solar system. The Taken King had fallen. Like the Vault of Glass before it, this was an exceptional experience. It was the biggest challenge the game had to offer, and provided tons of weekly fun for the most hardcore corner of the Destiny player base. The Taken King expansion provided the single biggest drop of new stuff since the game first released, truly revitalizing the player base and keeping them involved for months on end. And I can tell you the larger vibes of the player base had never been better. Destiny was on the right track. It wasn't perfect yet, but this was fantastic news. If they could keep this up, this game was well on its way to becoming as good, if not better, than Bungie's Halo games. After a rocky first year, this kicked off year 2 in spectacular fashion. The big question was, what's next? Well, if we remember back to the contract Bungie had with Activision, they were planning a specific release schedule that'd carry this franchise over the next decade. Every year there'd be a major new title for the Destiny universe, starting with the main disc-based game, followed by a major expansion 1 year later, and then the next disc-based game 1 year after that. So now that we have both Destiny and the Taken King, the next step is pretty clear. We're heading towards Destiny 2. Get yourselves ready and mark your calendars. 2016 is coming, and it's going to provide the next major chapter in the Destiny universe. Destiny 2 is going to knock our socks off. Unless, of course, it gets delayed an entire year. Well, that's unfortunate.